Sprinklers were still hissing when I spotted my prototype floating in a grey puddle under the gala lights. Everyone was filming. He stood there with a linen napkin pressed to his temple, performing shock like a minor celebrity. I knew then he hadn't just taken my design. He had taken the script and cast himself as the victim. The fire alarm had started during the applause, a shrill ribbon cutting through the polite noise of donors at the Maritime Futures Gala in Rotterdam. Half the room thought it was part of the show, some immersive piece meant to remind us that water is both a friend and a guillotine. But then a curtain breathed, then flashed, and suddenly shimmered with a line of orange, like someone had traced it with a blowtorch. The room moved in the choreography of panic, heels catching on carpet, the clink of abandoned glasses, emails composing themselves in the heads of insurance brokers. I waded in ankle-deep water to retrieve the warped acrylic hull that had been the heart of my year. The 150 model of a modular, flood-resilient housing unit designed for tidal towns with shrinking budgets and rising seas. It had the stupid name every grant makes you mint, Adaptive Habitat Node, AHN, pronounced like a sigh. The sigh now felt prophetic. I picked up the base, and the little pier snapped off and drifted toward a photographer's boot. Behind me, a tall man with dark curls tucked his napkin tighter against his head and caught my eye like we were two survivors sharing a lifeboat. "Tomas," he said, "what a disaster." His voice was smooth and caught only on the name he used for me in emails designed to be forwarded. A soft vowel, a professional intimacy. He was the project manager on the Urban Resilience Program that had dined on my idea for 12 months, fundraised with it in Brussels on 24 April 2025, promised pilot sites in Zeeland and Kerry, then quietly cut me out of the press releases. His name was Jonathan Becker. American father, German mother, raised in Hamburg, trained at ETH Zurich, skin that always looked as if he'd just left a sauna and had opinions about humidity. I met him last year, on 12th of August 2024, at a lecture I gave at TU Delft about low-cost buoyant foundations. He stayed afterward to ask about the math, not the vibe, which I loved. People often wanted the vibe. He wanted torsion limits, barge width constraints, supply chains. He was good, almost distractingly good. He always knew which slide to hold on, which word to leave in a memo, so it felt like the only honest thing in a forest of promises. He could listen to a fisherman and an investor in the same afternoon, and make both feel like the room had been built for them. When we began drafting the grant application for the EU Urban Adaptation Seed Fund, he minced no superlatives. "You're the engine," he told me on a call from the ferry to Harlingen, where he'd gone to look at a marina project. "I'm the track, put your train on me and we'll get there." Later, in an email on 2nd September 2024 at 10:42, he wrote, "If this hits, you'll own the tech. We'll license implementation. You'll be on every panel. If you go hunting for red flags, you'll find them, but by then you're invested in the hunt, and that means you're already lost." He was a discloser without disclosing. He'd tell you about his chaotic ex and burnout at 32, about the years he'd wasted in consulting at a firm in Frankfurt with a glass staircase that made you feel like you were climbing out of your body. He'd tell you about learning not to be a hero. You'd nod, not a hero, responsible, quietly excellent, the type who remembers to bring extension cords to a site visit. On 15th of November 2024, we signed a memorandum of collaboration at an address in Amsterdam Zuid, Stadionweg 105-3, a lawyer's office with a pale rug and a bonsai tree that made me think of engineered patience. The memo was 5 pages and used shall twice as often as necessary. The guts were simple. I licensed my design for the Adaptive Habitat Node to his non-profit, Harbourlace Foundation, for the purpose of prototyping and piloting in designated areas. IP remained mine. Commercial rollout would require a separate agreement. The term foundational design features was defined with 3 bullet points that I had written, which would turn out to be the only reason my lawyer later smiled. When the grant award came through on 9th of January 2025, €425,000 to be dispersed in 2 tranches, he texted a screenshot of the notification from EU Seed Fund. EU with 6 champagne emojis and pack your bags, Kinsale wants us. He'd already lined up a council member in County Cork, a hotel rate, and a videographer who shot with a drone as casually as lighting a cigarette. We were leaving on 27 January. He bought our tickets that afternoon on KLM, AMS Dub Kia. He told me not to worry about reimbursement. Harbourlace will float it until the first disbursement, he said. In Kinsale, I watched him charm fishermen onto a floating pontoon that wasn't yet ours. He threaded himself through problem statements with a dancer's economy. Flood risk plans written on community center flip charts. Insurers who looked like they'd be happier if a storm did all the math for them. He made us a light evening curry at the Airbnb on St. John's Hill and played vinyl he'd picked up in Galway. And when he put the needle down, you could feel him watching the mood in the way a good engineer watches a hinge. He was the person I wanted when the tide of logistics swelled. He was the person who later put his hand on my shoulder at the gala, eyelashes wet from the sprinklers. And he was the person who emailed me on 3rd of March 2025, subject line, micro-shift in messaging, to tell me we needed to reframe the adaptive habitat node as an ecosystem framework rather than a device. Devices get trapped in procurement hell, he wrote at 0817. Frameworks get invited to dinner. The dinner was in Brussels on 24th April at the Halcyon Collective Club, a co-working space pretending to be a private society. There were candles too elegant to be safe, and a buffet of donor money disguised as pecorino with honey. He introduced me as the genius behind the core geometry. Donors always like a geometry. He did the part where he admitted he didn't understand everything, which is what people say when they want you to think they're not controlling you. He used the word stewardship 5 times and the word land twice. Even the potted plants felt courted. By then, I felt the little nicks you attribute to your own grip. A missing credit on a press release posted 28 April. A deck that looked too polished, too measured, as if nothing had been built because everything was already sold. The non-profit's bank account, which I wasn't on, he said adding signatories, was a Dutch administrative hell and promised to fix it after his all-smear appointment, which sounded invented by someone who believed in florists. He'd forward me reimbursements for small things, €63 for PVC sheets from Multimat, €27 for a taxi to a meeting in The Hague, but the larger invoices floated like unmoored buoys. The €7,200 purchase order for the pumpless ballast prototypes was with the accountant. The €14,500 invoice from the composites firm in Gouda was queued pending tranche release. He was always in a queue. He was always explaining Dutch things to me in the sort of Netherlands where nothing had time to be waved through. On 2nd of May, Harbalace's bank, ING, account ending 4901, received the first grant disbursement of €212,500. I know this now because I saw the PDF later, green numbers as neat as a lie. That day he sent me €1,300 with the subject line, May retainer, partial, and an apology that made me feel guilty for having a rent. The second donor wire is lagging, he said on a call, walking from his bike into the office on Boompjesgade in Rotterdam. He laughed gently. You know how donors are. 5 lunches to move a comma. He changed the subject to ask if we could make the little windows in the model more photogenic. He had a way of making money sound like the least interesting dependency in the story. People who deal in other people's futures often do. I discovered the first cut on 16th of May 2025, when a photographer I'd worked with, a Belgian named Zoe, forwarded a link to a video Harbalace had posted on their Vimeo. Congrats, she wrote, with the emoji that wears a party hat and looks like it means it. The video was gorgeous, moody dawn shots of Kinsale, me drawing on tracing paper, his hand passing me a coffee. But the voiceover turned my stomach the way motion sickness starts behind the ears. It was Jonathan's voice, and he was explaining the adaptive habitat node as if it had been co-authored by our design team, which would be fine if the design team had existed. He referred to our proprietary hinge concept. The hinge was mine, not in the possessive, childish way ideas can feel, but in the hard way you can draw from memory and label each bolt. I emailed him at 14:03. Small note on wording. Hinge concept is mine per MOC2B and should be credited accordingly. He called instead of replying, which I've learned is the first refuge of people who want to be forgiven for the thing they are still doing. Absolutely, he said, wind in his mic. Let's update captions. I adore your specificity. He updated nothing. The number that finally put my heart into my mouth was on an invoice a week later. He asked me to sign off on a €17,900 payment to a firm called Oricon Systems BV for water-level sensors and integration for our pilot. I didn't recognize the firm. I Googled them. The website had words but no work, a template with a theme chosen by someone who likes gradients and opacity sliders. I checked the Chamber of Commerce. Oricon was incorporated on 7th of May 2025 by Jonathan Becker, director, with a co-director named F. Klein, an administrative assistant from Harbalace. I scrolled until anger drained away, and something colder arrived. He had set up a daughter company to bill his own program for equipment, drone footage, web hosting, and communications. It was a siphon with letterhead. I asked to see bank statements for Harbour Lace, just for 2 to 3 months, to reconcile grant disbursement. He said, of course, he'd asked their accountant, a woman named Lika who was on maternity leave, but checking email sometimes. He invited me to lunch at Hotel New York, table 14, on 23rd May, then cancelled because a donor wanted to see the prototype float test. He sent a photo of himself in Wellington boots, captioned Priorities. So I did the least cinematic thing in the world and opened a spreadsheet. I built a table with columns: date, description, party, amount, status, doc link. I put in everything I'd billed and everything we'd discussed. I added a column called Excuse, which is when I knew I was turning a corner in my head. The excuse column grew: accountant queue, donor wire lag, bank adding signatory, maternity leave, build site insurance pending, hinge supplier waiting on raw materials. I added another column called Reality. It was mostly blank at first. It didn't stay blank. On 27th of May, I went to the Harbour Lace office at Boompjesgade 215, a unit with plants your grandmother would call air cleaners, and a kitchenette that smelled like ambition and cumin. Jonathan wasn't there. I told the receptionist, a French intern named Adele, that I needed to check a measurement on the model. She let me in because my face had been in videos. I found my prototype in a plexiglass case with a caption card that credited Harbour Lace Design Team and listed 3 people whose skills had nothing to do with engineering. Sitting next to it were printouts of a deck. I slid a deck out and skimmed. Slide 12. IP ownership and rollout. The text said, Harbour Lace holds essential IP in hinge and ballast methodologies through affiliated entities. I stared at that sentence until the paper blurred, because it was a theft and a test. Would I correct it politely and be named difficult? Would I accept it because taking something away from you slowly is not the same as stealing, if you ask the person with the slow hands? I took photos of the slides and emailed them to myself. Then I photographed the caption card, then the lock on the display case, because some coward part of me believed I was already pretend. I left and bought a stroopwafel I couldn't taste. I confronted him at 21:10 on 27 May. He said the deck was a draft. He said affiliated didn't mean owned. He said he understood that optics mattered. He said we needed to be a united front because the second grant tranche was contingent on a cohesive IP plan, and donors hated infighting because it reminded them of the inside of their own heads. He said he'd update the card tomorrow. He did not. On 30th of May, I walked back, and the card was unchanged, but there was a new plant, which is not a metaphor, but might as well have been. I asked a lawyer for an initial consult. Her name is Dr. Saskia Venn, office on Mauritsweg 53B, Rotterdam. I booked 3rd of June at 09:30. I brought the MOC, bank screenshots I had pried out of thin air, the Oricon invoice, and a printout of the Vimeo caption. She listened with the kind of stillness that makes you doubt your adjectives. She drew 3 boxes on a legal pad: contract, fraud, optics. You have the first, she said. You suspect the second. The third is where he lives. She pointed to Clause 2B in our memo, where we had defined foundational design features as bulleted items, including articulated hinge assemblies for modular buoyant platforms that facilitate lateral shear as water levels fluctuate. She underlined foundational. You own that, she said, unless you assign it, which you did not. I asked about the siphon company. She said that was tomorrow's business. Today's business was the letter. On 4th of June, she sent a letter to Harbour Lace and Jonathan personally, registered post and email, subject, notice of breach and demand to cure, giving them 10 business days to 1. Remove misleading IP statements in all public materials. 2. Cease representing Harbour Lace or any affiliate as holder of the AHN hinge or ballast IP. 3. Pay outstanding invoices totaling €23,542, detailed in an attached schedule. And 4. Add me as a signatory to the ING account per our MOC, 4C. It's a strange feeling to see your grievance operationalized into bullets. It's like your pain put on a uniform. He called me 3 minutes after receiving it. This is a misunderstanding we could have resolved over coffee, he said. This is punitive. This makes donors nervous. He said donors like doctors, like you do not question them, or they make you wait in a colder room. The 10 business days bent like metal. On day 9, 17th of June, at 18:32, an email from Info Harbour Lace. org arrived saying they had updated captions. They had changed Vimeo to read, Adaptive Habitat Node, developed with contributions from Harborlace design team, which was somehow worse. They attached a PDF of the bank, adding me as a viewer, on the ING account, not a signatory. It was a read-only seat in a theatre where my future was being performed. On 19th of June, my neighbour in Rotterdam, a nurse named Leah, who knows gossip better than the police, sent me a link to an Instagram story from Harborlace tagged, "We won." It was a clip from the Maritime Futures Gala, where we had first pitched AHN, the evening already acid in my memory. It showed the jury chair announcing the Innovation for Tidal Communities Award, €50,000, from a foundation whose logo had a whale tail. The award went to Harborlace for their proprietary modular flood housing solution. The word proprietary hit my chest like a flat palm. I called the foundation's director, a woman named Margot, on 20th of June at 11:05. She was brisk until I said breach, at which point her schedule opened like a lily. She asked for documents. I sent them. I also sent her photos of the deck slide. She replied with one sentence, "We take misrepresentation seriously." That was the last simple sentence I'd received for a while. The gala where this story began was on 28th of June. Nothing was on fire until it was. It was one of those evenings that looks unshockable in black tie and becomes very shockable in a hiss. When the sprinklers came on, my first absurd thought was that the building had finally joined the climate conversation. My second was that if bad things insist on metaphor, we should at least get to choose them. Jonathan pressed the napkin to his head because a lighting rig had been knocked during the rush and clipped him. He performed regret, as if he had been paid to. "I'll call the insurer," he told a volunteer. He looked at me and said, with a perfect curl of his mouth, "No one wanted this." In the wet noise, I had a moment of clarity so sharp it felt like a smell. He believed this was his, not because he had invented it, but because he had arranged it. He had told the right version of the story, to the right people, for long enough that the story had become true in rooms I wasn't in. That's what power is. Not having facts, having rooms. I went home and started building my own rooms. First, procedure. On 29th June, at 08:12, I filed a report with the Dutch police through their online portal for economic offences, attaching my MOC, the letter from Dr. Veen, the bank screenshots, the Oricon invoice, and a chronology. I received a case number, 2025-348791R. That afternoon, I emailed the EU Urban Adaptation Seed Fund Programme Officer, a man named Armin with patience, grown in an office with too few windows, and requested a temporary freeze on the second grant tranche pending resolution of the breach. I included the same attachments and the case number. At 17:44, he replied that they would pause disbursement for 30 days while conducting an administrative review. I printed that email out of superstition and slid it under my router. I also did the quiet, stupid thing you do when your stomach lives in your throat. I backed up everything. I exported my Google Drive folder, titled AHN Call 2024-2025, and saved it to 2 encrypted USB drives. I printed the design spec and bound it at a copy shop on Witte de Witstraat, where students print their theses. I felt like a student again, proofing the page numbers of my life. The text messages began the same day. He started with apologies and ended in adjectives. Rash, overkill, career-ending, words meant to spook a person who has grown up believing in someday. He started showing up. On 1st July at 08:05, he was outside my building, leaning on his bike, pretending to scroll. A neighbour asked if he was locked out. "No, waiting for a friend," he said, looking up too brightly when I opened the door. I didn't invite him up. I lifted my hand in a motion that means both hello and enough. He asked to talk. "Not now," I said, and went up the stairs with my heartbeat in my ears like a train. On 4th of July, I met with Dr. Veen again. Her office smelled like paper and a kind of gum you chew when you are quitting. She had drafted a second letter, notice of termination. If Harborlace did not cure the breach within 5 business days, my license would terminate as of 12th of July. "He'll call this nuclear," she said. "He'll call donors and tell them you're unstable. He'll say you jeopardize the pilot. He'll say you're taking water away from poor people." She paused, sighed. "You have to be ready for that. Good people love a villain, if it means they can be good." I signed the letter. My hand shook. She gave me tea, like you give tea to someone who has a fever reading the weather. Meanwhile, things were happening in rooms I couldn't see. On 7th of July, the foundation that had awarded Harborlace the €50,000 prize posted a statement on their site. We are temporarily suspending the award to Harbalace Foundation pending a review of questions raised about intellectual property attributions. Someone sent it to me within minutes. The caption on their Instagram read, "We believe in innovation and integrity." The comments were a paranoid chorus, half of them bots promising to fix hacked accounts. The human half said, "Shame a lot. I don't love the internet, but on that day, I loved it like a dog that has learned one trick and performs it earnestly." Jonathan's escalation arrived in an envelope. On 10th of July, I received a defamation cease and desist letter from a Swiss firm Harbalace had hired once for a branding exercise. It accused me of malicious and untrue statements causing reputational harm and demanded I retract my claims to IP ownership by 12th of July. The date choice was petty and precise. The same day my termination letter would become effective. Dr. Veen faxed them our documents like she was stacking sandbags. "They don't want to win in court," she said. "They want to win in your head." He tried other routes. He emailed a counselor in Kerry, whom I'd sat next to at dinner, a woman named Breed who talks like a violin, implying I had mental health challenges. She phoned me the same day, 11th July, and told me, in that musical way, that I had her full support. She also told me he had been in touch with a German magazine, pitching a piece on the lonely genius versus the community, because there is always a pitch about why the thing you did is unkind to the people it would help. Then came the good turn I hadn't expected. It arrived in a voice like a rented van. On 13th of July, I received a call from Professor Eileid McKenna at the University of Glasgow's Urban Flood Lab. We had met once at a conference in Bremen, where our coffee went cold and we didn't mind. "I've read your spec," she said. "A student of mine sent it, and I'd like you to know we see it. We see the math, not the marketing." She invited me to give a seminar on 24th of July. They'd cover travel. She also introduced me to their contracts officer, who sent me a template IP agreement that had saved more than one young engineer from an overly confident partner. It was an antidote in PDF form. On 14th of July, I received another email from Armin at the EU Fund. They had initiated an audit of Harbalace's expenses. They requested bank statements from 1st November 2024 through 30th of June 2025, plus invoices, purchase orders, and proof of work. They copied me. I felt cold and absolute, like the moment in winter when you understand what ice means. Jonathan responded within an hour with the online equivalent of a raised voice about burdensome oversight. Armin's reply was one sentence: "This is routine." I printed it too. On 16th of July, a file found me, not via hacker magic, but via an accountant who discovered a conscience. A woman named Lika, yes, the one on maternity leave, forwarded me Harbalace's bank statement PDFs, months 11/2024 through 062025, with the subject line, "I cannot continue like this." I will always remember that line. The statements showed the €212,500 grant hitting on 2nd May, then a series of expenditures, €9,800 to Oricon Systems BV on 6 May, $3,450 to Flight Creative, the drone video alias for Oricon, on 12 May, $2,600 to Dotwave Hosting, also Oricon, on 20 May, $1,900 for catering at the Brussels dinner to a restaurant that I know took cash. There were legitimate charges too, composites, a small Irish boat rental, but the pattern was a duffel bag of sham. The one payment to me was the €1,300 retainer he'd sent while telling me he was in a queue. Lika's email also included, without comment, a draft contract she'd found on Jonathan's desktop, titled Hinge Rollover, Agreement, V3, Docs, dated 28th of May 2025. It assigned the AHN Hinge concept and related improvements to Oricon Systems for consideration of €1. The signature line for the inventor held my name, misspelled, ghost-like, unsigned. He had tried to write me into his daughter company with a typo. I printed everything until my apartment smelled like toner. I put the papers in a blue plastic folder and took them to Dr. Veen. She read like someone searching a grain sack for seeds. She smiled at one point, a small, private thing. "This," she said, tapping the rollover agreement. "He has put his head in a basket and handed us the rope." On 18th of July, we filed a civil claim in the District Court of Rotterdam, alleging breach of contract and unjust enrichment against Harbalace and Jonathan personally, and we requested a preliminary injunction preventing Harbalace and any affiliates from representing ownership of the AHN Hinge or Ballast IP or using my designs in any promotional materials. We also sought an accounting and an escrow of remaining grant funds. The injunction hearing was scheduled for 5th of August. Dates make you feel sane again. They are handrails in a stairwell. The days until the hearing were not cinematic. They were receipts and new folders, and an accumulation of recorded things. I kept a log of every time he appeared outside my building, each time stamped on my phone, with a brief description. I installed a small camera inside my apartment door that notified me when someone lingered. I told neighbors. On 20th of July, I filed a stalking report with the police, attaching my log and 3 screenshots of him outside my door on his phone, a pose as boring as a bench. I bought a door brace. I learned the difference between feeling paranoid and being prudent. They looked the same from the outside. He still texted. He alternated between love bombing and litigation speak, like it was a rhythm that would hypnotize me back into an older version of myself. I never wanted this, he wrote. We were brilliant together. Then, our counsel advises that your termination letter is void for lack of consideration. I didn't answer. I folded each text into my file like a pressed flower. The seminar at Glasgow on 24th July felt like oxygen in a city that is both stone and sky. I spoke for 70 minutes in a room that smelled like old books and ambition. I showed the hinge in cross-section, the ballast logic, the failure modes. Professor McKenna sat in the front row with a look that said, "Go slow, we are here for the slow part." After, a PhD student named Andres asked me about supply chains in low-income coastal towns. A postdoc named Kirsty brought up a community land trust in Greenock that might adapt the AHN concept. My lungs came back to me. The Urban Flood Lab invited me to collaborate. A week later, they sent a small consultancy contract with fair terms and a clause that might as well have been written in lavender. All pre-existing IP remains with the inventor. That night, in my hotel on University Avenue, I slept one long sleep. Back home, the audit bit down. Armin wrote on 26 July, requesting explanation for Oricon Systems. Jonathan replied that Oricon was a strategic procurement partner. Armin asked for their incorporation documents and ownership structure. Jonathan stalled. On 30th of July, Armin asked again, and included me in the ask like you include a witness when mercy ends. On 31st July, Margot's foundation formally rescinded the €50,000 award and requested the money back, if any had been advanced. Their statement used regret and clarity in the way institutions use them when they mean, we would like to not be embarrassed anymore. The hearing on 5th of August was not a dramatic courtroom drama. It was fluorescent lights and a judge with a dry cough and a clerk who had seen it all. Jonathan came with counsel. He wore a suit that could have paid an invoice. He nodded at me on the corridor bench like we were waiting for a train. In court, his lawyer argued that the foundational design features were conceptual and that Harbour-Lace's affiliated entities had only developed applications. Dr. Veen said little. She put the MOSI clause on a screen and then gently, like a person picking up a bird, placed the Oricon assignments before the judge. She showed the €1 consideration. She spelled my name, the way it had been misspelled. Then she put up the bank statements and traced the money like a kindergarten teacher helping a child find their way out of a maze. When Jonathan spoke, he attempted the same posture he used with donors. Humble steward with too many emails. He said the siphon was necessary. He said the affiliate structure was temporary. He said, my colleague here, and gestured to me as if I'd come in his briefcase. He said I had overreacted. He said we had lost the narrative. He told the judge that we had a drama problem, not a legal one, and I couldn't help it. I laughed, a sound ugly with relief. The judge raised an eyebrow. The room scented itself with paper and startled mammals. 2 days later, on 7th of August at 14:02, the court issued the preliminary injunction. Harbour-Lace and Jonathan were prohibited from claiming ownership over the adaptive habitat node hinge and ballast IP, from using my designs in any public communications, and from receiving or dispersing the second grant tranche pending the outcome of the audit and the case. The order was terse and beautiful. There is a line in it I printed twice. The claimant's contractual rights are clear. I cried in my kitchen, a sound I had forgotten I could make. That should be the end, but stories about theft have long tails. He escalated again, but in a different key. On 9th August, he posted on his personal LinkedIn a long message about sustaining impact amid toxicity. He never named me, but he didn't have to. People wrote things like stay strong and don't let small minds limit big visions. 2 donors who liked their names on stones wrote the DM equivalent of polite frowns. A colleague from Kinsale texted me that she had been told I'd gone rogue. It is easy to go rogue when the route has been mapped by someone else's storyteller. I added it all to the file. On 12th of August, I updated my stalking report with 3 more sightings and an instance where he followed me into the Albert Heijn and stood too close by the oranges. The police called him and told him to stop. He posted a photo of a road on Instagram with a caption about learning when to pull over. He is the kind of man who believes you can subtweet the law. The positive turn grew legs. The Glasgow lab connected me with an insurance firm in Dublin, specializing in community-level flood adaptation. They wanted to pilot a micro-premium program with a physical anchor, an AHN unit built as a community hub. The Councillor Brid introduced me to a shipyard manager in Cove who had capacity in September. Professor McKenna wrote me a support letter stating plainly that the hinge was mine and that she would happily testify to my authorship. Armin wrote on 20th August that the EU fund would reassign the grant to a new consortium led by the Urban Flood Lab, with me as technical lead, contingent on a revised work plan by September. I sat with that email on my screen until the sun made my window a sheet of sugar. The last twist is the one people like to hear, because it lets them put bow ties on messy lives. I do not believe in bow ties, but I believe in endings that rhyme. On 28th August, exactly 2 months after the gala alarms and the sprinklers kissed the floor, I was at the Maritime Futures building again. This time, there was a different kind of crowd. Not gowns, but a rectangle of serious people around a table with coffee that had been brewed by someone who valued flavour over drama. It was a meeting of the Grants Reassignment Committee. 3 bureaucrats who understood that excellence is sometimes just not stopping, Professor McKenna on screen, and me. Harbourlace had been invited to submit a statement. They sent a PDF arguing we were endangering communities by focusing on paperwork. It was adorned with photos of waves. At the end of the meeting, as I was unplugging my laptop, Jonathan walked in. He hadn't been invited, but some people treat doors like suggestions. He had a bandage still, a memory of his napkin. He looked at me with the oddest expression. Not anger, not even disdain. It was more like surprise that the world could proceed without him. "Tomas," he said softly, like he was practicing a better past. "We could still do this together." I put my hands on the table edge. I thought about the first time he'd called me engine. I thought about all the times I had translated his wind into numbers. I thought about a clause that held because I had bulleted it. I thought about the room we were in now, and who had built it. "Jonathan," I said, "you don't own the hinge." He blinked. I was suddenly tired of metaphors. I was suddenly fond of the word no. I packed my model, a new one, with a hinge that had been improved in 3 tiny ways since June, into its case. I nodded to the room and walked out. Sprinklers were not hissing, but as the automatic doors opened, the rain had started, light and democratic. Outside, I set the model on the passenger seat and strapped it in with a seatbelt I had never been sentimental about until that moment. On my phone, a new email arrived from Armin. The grant reassignment was approved. I laughed in my car, the sound bouncing off the little hull like applause. Later, in Kinsale, in October, we slid the first full-scale AHN unit into a harbour that had pretended to be patient for years. Kids on bikes watched. A grandmother with a shopping bag watched. A counsellor cried. The unit rose and fell with the tide, the way we had promised strangers we could make it rise and fall. The hinge did what it was told. And because the world is a moral that writes itself sometimes, a woman with a phone filmed me smiling, the exact inverse of that night, 2 months and a city ago, when water poured from a ceiling and a man pressed a white square to his head like a communion and pretended the pain was his. I got home late, boots damp, model still buckled beside me out of habit I was not ready to lose. And when I closed my door and turned the deadbolt I didn't know I still needed, I stood a second in the small quiet and listened for the hiss that wasn't there, and said it out loud, a sentence with no metaphor at all. It's mine. If you ask me for a lesson, I will give you a clause. Foundational design features remain with the person who builds them. If you ask me for a moral, I'll give you a procedure. Put your story on paper before someone else gives it a video. If you ask me for proof, I have it in a blue folder with dates and sums and a typo on an assignment I never signed. And if you ask me whether I would have done anything differently, I would have asked for bank access on day 1, and I would have loved the hinge more, like a thing that would someday be stolen. That night I slept like a slab of wood. In the morning I woke to rain and emails and a photo of the AHN unit at high tide. The caption was from Professor McKenna, and it wasn't a platitude or a ribbon. It just said, working. And that's where the story begins again. Sprinklers off, water doing the right job, and a script that belongs to the person who writes it.